World leaders have voiced disappointment at the lack of progress made on climate policies at the G20.
It's the body that should be leading COVID recovery, economic recovery, but it's also hopelessly divided between its internal membership.
And that, to me, makes it a disappointing G20.
Despite its early promise, the G20 has often been criticized for failing to tackle some of the most pressing global issues of our time. But how and why did the bloc come into existence? What challenges has it faced? And are the criticisms really warranted?
The G20, or Group of 20, is an informal meeting of 20 of the world's largest economies. It was born out of the G7, or Group of 7, in 1999, with one main purpose: global financial stability. At the time, the world was in the process of recovering from a financial crisis, which originated in Asia in 1997 and spread across international stock markets. The finance ministers and central bank governors for the G7 met in Washington, D.C. following the crisis and realized they couldn't sufficiently address vulnerabilities in the global financial system without expanding the number of economies sitting around the table. So they proposed a new forum, which would eventually include the G7 countries and 13 other systemically significant economies.
The forum was initially confined to the finance ministers and central bank governors of the 20 members. Guest countries, as well as international and regional organizations, would also be invited to attend. But heads of state didn't get involved until nearly a decade later, when another bigger financial crisis came along.
The G20 leaders meeting was a result of an accident. The big accident was the global financial crisis of 2008-2009.
Kishore Mahbubani was the president of the United Nations Security Council in the early 2000s. He explained to me how the G20 meetings expanded in scope.
The United States realized that it was in its interests to have a leaders meeting to try and find a solution to the global financial crisis. And I would say that was the finest moment of the G20 leaders meeting, especially the second leaders meeting in London. They came up with a global stimulus package that essentially saved the world. And it saved the world because everybody participated in it. Even China, which had not been very badly affected, was prepared to commit $50 billion for a $1 trillion global stimulus package.
Collectively, the G20 bloc makes up over 80% of global gross domestic product and 75% of international trade.
The G7 is a sunset organization and the G20 is a sunrise organization. When the G7 leaders meet, they claim to speak on behalf of the world, but they represent less than 10% of the world's population, whereas the G20 represents 60% of the world's population.
While the G20 may indeed be a more representative body than the G7, it doesn't mean impactful solutions like the global stimulus package that emerged out of the 2009 summit come easily. In fact, much of the heavy lifting is done in the lead-up to these meetings.
The G20 presidency rotates each year among its members. In the absence of a permanent secretariat, a TROIKA, which consists of the current, previous and incoming presidencies, shapes the agenda while ensuring the continuity of tasks and goals from previous years. This work is divided into two streams, a finance track and the Sherpa track. All agenda items under the finance track are handled by the members' finance ministers and central bank governors. They work in conjunction with the G20 leaders' personal representatives, known as Sherpas, whose remit includes a wider spectrum of issues. Both tracks feature a series of ministerial meetings, working groups, conferences, and engagements with non-governmental organizations. Francesco Mancini is a non-resident senior advisor at the International Peace Institute and a professor at the National University of Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy.
The G20s are actually quite informal if you compare them to the traditional, very stiff kind of diplomatic chambers of the United Nations. It was born, the G20, as a tool to address macroeconomics and financial issues. But today, the agenda is much broader. They discuss unemployment, corruption, climate change, digital technology, you name it. We all remember the summit because that's the moment when the presidents and the prime minister meet. But in reality, there's been already many meetings through the year. At the end, there is generally a communiqué, a statement that is built on consensus.
The key word here is consensus. So how often is it achieved?
Unfortunately, the United States lost interest in the G20. In fact, a former director of the National Intelligence Council told me very frankly, he said, Kishore, I know why a small state like Singapore likes multilateral institutions because it enhances your ability to influence other countries. Whereas for a great power like the United States, multilateral institutions constrain them.
If, for example, we think about the time of President Trump, where he actually withdrew from the Paris Agreement, which triggered the G20 to actually reinforce their commitment to the Paris Agreement, normal language like international cooperation and trade were not used in the communique because the US was against it. I think since then things got a little better. But the reality is that tariffs that Trump put in place are still there. The division is still there.
In 2014, Russia was suspended from what was then the G8 following the annexation of Crimea before it decided to permanently leave in 2017. And then in 2022, there were calls for it to be excluded from the G20 meetings after its invasion of Ukraine.
And that's an absolute mistake because at the end of the day, Russia is a key player in the world, as are all other great powers, and it's better to have them all in one room talking to one another.
And there aren't just internal divisions within the G20. Protests have been a regular feature at the summits, a clear indication of public discontent regarding the bloc's ability to address key global problems or lack thereof. In 2018, market research firm YouGov polled inhabitants of 5 G20 member countries about their perception of the bloc's problem-solving abilities. The results were not encouraging. Those residing in Argentina, which held the G20 presidency that year, had the most positive perceptions of the forum, followed by Russia. It was a different picture in the UK, Germany, and the US, where only a third of those polled viewed the G20 favorably. There are also questions over the G20's exclusivity. A report as far back as 2011 by the Danish Institute for International Studies termed the G20's institutionalized practice of inviting representatives from underrepresented regions as concession at the margins, while also criticizing its move of permanently excluding 173 countries as a fact that undercuts its claim to representational legitimacy.
Today, those 173 countries continue to be excluded from the G20's membership. So, is there hope for a more inclusive future?
Why should 10% of the world's population hold 40% of the seats of G20? That's not right. It just reflects the fact that they are economically more powerful. But in the world of tomorrow, let's say if you exclude a country like Nigeria, which by current projections will have a larger population than China by the year 2100, then you are not having a representative body that represents the world of things. So I think there needs to be constant reshuffling of the membership of the G20 to reflect not yesterday's powers, but tomorrow's powers.
The most representative body in the world is the General Assembly of the United Nations, where every country is present with one vote. But we also know that it's very hard for this body to be effective. So I wouldn't go for a G50. I think it would be a big challenge to make any concrete decision.
While the informal nature of the G20 means there are no binding resolutions or sanctions, advocates say the forum is invaluable in fostering conversations between leaders.
We have to remember that there's a lot of bilateral activities happening during these meetings. In the past, we might remember in Hamburg, Trump and Putin disappearing for hours to do their own kind of private summit, or where President Biden and Macron of France had the opportunity to meet again after the UK and US and Australia kicking out France from a submarine nuclear agreement with Australia.
The G20 leaders' meetings themselves often don't accomplish very much. But when you have bilateral meetings on the side, they can be incredibly important. Even if there's no consensus among the leaders, it doesn't mean that the meeting has failed, because there may actually have been a better understanding that has developed.